far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha, everyone. This is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you.
It's the spirit of Hawaii that keeps you thinking of this lovely place. All the love, all the happiness, just the lover in your embrace. It's the spirit of Hawaii. The swaying palms on a sandy lagoon have all your grandeur dreams come true each time you wake. Waikiki has never looked so good, having been away so long. And now that you're here with me, I'll sing you my song.
Aloha once again, and thank you for stopping by to hear another amazing life story. We just heard Moana Lua with Spirit of Hawaii, and mid-podcast we're going to hear Island of Love from Priscilla. Now, if you've listened to this podcast, you've heard many times, well, you've heard me say, this guest has an interesting life story. And I say this because I truly believe everyone has an interesting story. Now, are there some life stories maybe a bit more interesting than others? Sure, but that's for you listeners to decide. Now, that being said, I'm confident that the life story of my guest today, Wendy Alexander, will leave each of you feeling just a little bit better about life in general. You see, I already know a little bit about Wendy, so I know her story will be positive and inspirational. Wendy, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here, all the way from Australia. Down under, they call us.
Yeah, so it's 7 o'clock in the evening here for me on a Tuesday night, and I think it's about, 1 in the afternoon, Wednesday for you?
1 in the afternoon, Wednesday for me. That's right. We in the future.
Yeah.
We are in your future.
Yes, you are. Travel is so interesting. I mentioned to you before we started the podcast that I just got back from Spain and Morocco, and 24 hours it took to get home. And, you know, by the time you get to the airport and you have layovers and all that, and I'm telling you, that's what makes traveling tough, at least for me. I guess some people that do it all the time, maybe they get used to it, but that's hard because then it's another couple of days to recover from the jet lag, right?
That's right. That's right. And if you come this way, if you come sort of into your future, it takes even longer because I've traveled back and forth from America numerous times, and the jet lag is tough. It is tough. But I'd still travel. I love traveling too. So I'd still go even if I'm going to take 5 days to recover.
We're going to get into your life story in just a minute, but we talked a bit. You've already told me you've been to Hawaii a number of times, which is amazing to me because you grew up in South Africa, you live in Australia, and yet you've been to Hawaii a number of times.
Yeah, I love Hawaii. So I've been to Hawaii, sometimes just on its own, sometimes as a stopover to mainland USA. Probably traveled back and forth to the USA maybe 10 or 11 times in my life. I lived in the USA in Los Angeles for 2 years and also in New York for about 8-9 months. So I'm very familiar with America, but Hawaii was always, I've never lived in Hawaii. I've always simply visited there, but I love it. I love the island.
Right. Well, hey, let's hear your story. I mean, I know, like you say, that you grew up in South Africa. Maybe that's a good place to start, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, born in Cape Town in South Africa. So that's what people call the beautiful city. It is a stunning place, especially with Table Mountain as a backdrop. Aesthetically, very pretty place, but obviously with apartheid dominating the whole culture and social and political landscape there, it was a tough place to grow up. I'm classified as a person of color, so I'm biracial. I have what a white mix, well, a real mix, African mix. There's Indian somewhere in there, there's white in there, and so on. And so in South Africa, up until 1994, when the country was liberated, so to speak, and Mandela came in as prime minister, the country was divided into segregation of three races. So there was black race, there was the colored race, which is what I am, and the white race. And that's how the country was set up. And so, of course, as a child, I didn't know that. When you're born and you're a kid, you just in your neighborhood, you're playing, you're doing what you do in everyday life. And then I think my first introduction to the segregation or the racism in the country was at a beach at the age of 7. So we had gone down to the beach. Parents had taken us with another group of friends. I think we were only on the beach for about maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And then the policeman came and put us off the beach because that was a whites only beach. And I didn't know that. 7 years old, I'm not even looking for that type of sign on the beach. And I don't think my parents or even the friends knew that it was a whites only beach, because if they'd known, they wouldn't have gone there, because that's just the way the structures were set up. So you just knew where you could go and where you couldn't go. So we were put off the beach by these two policemen. And I remember, I was asking my father what's going on, but my father kept telling me, be quiet, be quiet. I was always the curious kid in the family, wanting to know why things were happening the way they were happening. And he just said to me, be quiet. He said, please, just be quiet. And anyway, we left. And as we drove off the beach, I saw the sign. So we had completely missed it. And then, of course, when I got home, I was pummeling my father with questions like, what does it mean? Why couldn't we go on the beach? What does the sign mean? All of this type of thing. And I remember Dad being angry. I suppose that he had to answer that question, number one, and in trying to make it make sense. That was my first introduction to the country that I was growing up in and to what was actually going on in the country. And then there were many, incidents like that. I do remember at the age of 15 being late for a train to school because we had to get a bus to the train station to get the connecting train and get on to school. And school was probably about 40 minutes in total away from my home. The bus was late. I missed I was going to miss the train. So I ran for the train, jumped into the first carriage that I could get on. And it was a whites only carriage. So, there again, I was put off the train and I got to school very late. At the time, the school that I went to was a Catholic girls' school. So it was run by German nuns. And I remember them, the principal obviously catching me and saying, why are you late? And I was so angry. I refused to tell her why I was late. I think that I was age 15. I'd already seen a lot of what's going on in South Africa. By that stage, I'd probably become more of an activist, trying to march in rallies and so on, to try and get the freedom for the colored and black people. And I didn't want to tell her why I was late. And it was probably an act of defiance. So I was given detention, and I took the detention. There was a level of pride and a level of extreme anger. I'm like, well, I'm not going to bother giving you an explanation, because what do you know? You're a white German woman, nun, wearing the habit. You're protected by the church. You wouldn't even know what my world was like. It was that kind of thoughts running through my head. It was also the time where so I've always written, I do a lot of writing. I started to write little short stories when I was a kid. A lot of it was to process the things I didn't understand. And I remember around that time when I got shoved off the train and was late for school and all of that, I started writing a lot of dark poetry, angry poetry. I mean, I look back on it now and I read some of the poems I wrote, and I thought, oh, you were a very angry girl, But it was all part of that whole environment. And then I spent one of my big, I suppose, sadnesses and regret was that the year I went into my last year of high school was also the year that you would have the matriculation ball, which in American terms would be the prom, right? The senior prom. And we all, got ready. We had our dresses made, all of these things. And then there was a spout of violence in the country. So internal unrest, protests were starting. They were getting out of hand. The police were coming into neighborhoods. And so that was cancelled. Schools were closed. So schools were closed probably about April. So the South African school term ran from February to November, December. And school was closed about April or late April, early May of that year and wasn't reopened. So we had to sneak to our teachers' houses to get lessons done because we were still expected to sit that final exam. And that obviously was an important exam because that's the exam that gives you the grades that then determines if you get to go to university or not. So one of the biggest regrets I have is that I've never had a prom. All right. I wanted to go to prom. I had there was a friend's son who was going with me. I had a date and everything. But of course, schools were closed, prom was cancelled. I actually had that dress, this beautiful dress made by my mother's friend who was a seamstress. I held onto that dress for a lot of years. Eventually got rid of it, but I think I even brought it with me to Australia. And only got rid of it maybe 12, 15 years later because I always wanted to go to a prom. I always wanted to wear that dress. Never did get to wear it.
Wendy,
so that's the sadness.
Yeah, I was going to say, hearing you talk about that, it takes me back to my younger years. I mean, I grew up in California, but when I was 11 years old, my dad took a job in Nashville, Tennessee, and we moved to the South in 1967. Martin Luther King, I mean, things were still going on. So I can understand what you're talking about from a perspective of having witnessed it on the news and things like that. But I can't relate being a person of color, but I know being a young person, 11 years old, just thinking, why do we have these differences? Why? Because in America, you would have restrooms and it would say, or drinking fountains, and it would say, whites only, or coloreds over here is a term they used back then.
Yeah.
But it was hard coming from California because I didn't notice it in California. It was a little bit more progressive, I guess. But man, moving to the South, it was like very noticeable. Even though we want to think and feel like we've come a long way, and we have, but there's still, undercurrents of prejudice and different things that exist everywhere, unfortunately. And if you've traveled, which I know you have, just hearing what you've already said, you see it. You see it everywhere. It's not just unique to South Africa or America. It's really, unfortunately, everywhere. All we can do is, I use that expression of know better, do better, and that's really all we can try and do.
That's right. Absolutely. And look, for a long time, I think it stunted certain emotional growth for me, and I did walk around very angry. And probably I would say that I was someone that had a chip on my shoulder for a while. But eventually, I started to realize, and that actually started happening just before I left South Africa. My father had always been involved in working in the townships. So the townships were the black parts of South Africa, very poverty-stricken, where people had like shanty little shacks that they erected from corrugated iron and things like that, because that was such a poor part of South Africa. And my father would go into these townships and he would teach English and maths and things like that. So my dad was all about education. And I remember arguing with him as a teenager because I was, a rebel and I wanted to be an activist and I wanted to do something. And my father would say, one of the ways you can make a difference in life is to get educated. Make sure that you're educated, that you can give yourself more opportunities, because he said you do need to attain a certain level of success to be able to influence an outcome in life. But of course, hot-headed that I didn't always listen, but I started to notice because I was attending a lot of rallies during my late teens, and people were getting tear gassed, some people were being shot, people were being killed. And I started to realize that losing your life or being imprisoned or being harmed wasn't going to make a difference in the country. If we wanted to, we needed to understand how the economics work, how the political structures work, and try to make the changes from within those structures. And it started to dawn on me that my father's approach of education, of contributing in that way, was probably, maybe it seemed slower, but it was a lot more lasting.
Right.
And so I started to change tactics. And I became, because I remember when I won a scholarship to go to the University of Cape Town, I wouldn't have been able to go otherwise. My parents just couldn't afford it. It was one of the most prestigious universities in South Africa. I won a scholarship to go there. And when I went there in my first year, I started to see that there were changes being made through the education system, that I could be a part of some of that. That didn't mean I stopped going to the rallies and the protests completely. I didn't. There was often marches on the campus, and I would be right in there with that. But I probably had a twofold approach to making the changes. And so that's where the change started to occur within me. I was like, no, I need to be more effective. And so I spent the first year at the University of Cape Town, and then after many tries, and I'm talking probably 12 or 13 attempts, we finally got the acceptance go ahead to migrate to Australia. Because my father had been trying for all those years to take his family out of South Africa. And so I ended up, we left in 87, and I completed my first year at university. And then I came across to Australia, migrated with the family. I left that scholarship behind, obviously, and came to Australia and had to start again. But I got a lot of credits because of the university I'd gone to. I got the credits for a lot of the subjects that I'd done in my first year, and I was able to continue on with university. But one of the great things about coming to Australia was their education was so much cheaper than ours. So back then, it isn't anymore, but back then, it's probably about a few $100s for the university fee and then your books. So whatever books you needed for whatever subjects you were taking. Yet still, because we were, a new migrant family in the country, and my father had just landed a job, we only were allowed to bring out a certain amount of money out of South Africa to Australia. So he pretty much just had the deposit for a home, and so he was taking on a new mortgage from scratch. And he said to the kids, he said, if you want to go further through university, you're going to have to find a job and put yourself through university. That was kind of how it was, which I did. And so did my siblings. We all eventually found our little part-time jobs or, worked, 50% of the time and took longer to finish uni in some cases. But that was, the transition into Australia. Now, that was a challenge in itself because I suppose we've been somewhat programmed, even though you didn't realize you were, to the life in South Africa. So the first couple of years in Australia was very strange. I remember looking for the signs that said I couldn't go here, there, and everywhere else. And I remember going into the city one time with my cousin who had been living in Australia for 5 years prior to when we arrived. And we were going in by train. And I remember saying to her, what carriage do I get on? And she said, you're not in South Africa anymore. She said, you can get on any carriage. Just get on the train,
Mm-hmm.
So that, I suppose, is an indication of what I was shedding. I had been in many ways programmed to look for all these signs that said you couldn't do this, couldn't go there. And, people think that when you find freedom, you just grab it by the hands. And yes, you should. But it takes adjustment when you have been living in a suppressed and oppressed environment for that long. And so I definitely struggled with that. So did my siblings. I mean, I remember looking at my father and feeling really sorry for him because he was dealing with 5 very unhappy children because despite the fact that we'd tried for years to get out of the country and we were excited about leaving the country, when we got to Australia, we didn't know how to navigate the new world that we were in. And then my mother was unwell. She had blood pressure issues and she was unwell because she was so worried about her 5 children who were miserable. And so Dad's there trying to make this new life for us, working a new job and trying to keep his wife calm and happy and keep her health, going in the right direction. And then his 5 children who also were struggling with the new life. So I look at my father now and I can really appreciate the sacrifice he made. Because Dad was also coming to the pinnacle of his career when we left, where he was finally getting opportunities, great opportunities in South Africa. Now, that was also something special in itself because it took years to build up that kind of thing, especially in organizations that had those structures around black, white, and colored, right? And Dad sacrificed those opportunities. He sacrificed for his children. I don't think we appreciated it at the time, but now when I look back and I have a lot of conversations with my father, I still have him around. He's in his 80s now. I realize what a huge sacrifice he made to give his kids a different life and an opportunity in a new country.
Yeah, and I think the word there
was for him.
Yeah, and that's the right word, is sacrifice, because he, like you say, he had, after many years, he'd kind of risen to a level that, maybe many others never achieved, and yet he gave that up because
yes,
in his opinion, in his mind, the greater success would be having his children be able to grow up and live in a place that didn't have that kind of segregation and that's Australia, and that was a great thing. And you're not the first person I've talked to who went from somewhere else to Australia because of the way Australia was at the time, and I guess still is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so I look back on the time, I recognize his sacrifice, have a huge appreciation for both my parents and how they got us through, because we were all, the youngest was 12 and the oldest was just turning, my brother had just turned 21. So we had to leave within a certain time frame because you had to leave within 6 months of his 21st birthday. Otherwise, he would have to migrate on his own. So once we got the acceptance letter, we packed up really quickly, booked the tickets, worked out the money and the sale of the house, and left. It was so my brother didn't have to migrate on his own. So it was a 21-year-old was the oldest, and my sister was 12 when we came. And all of us went through different challenges around that migration. My sister probably doesn't remember as much of South Africa because she was so young when we left, or younger than the rest of us. But she had to adapt too. And also she came into Australia and was, we were different looking to the average Australian. So she had some bullying there too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing, is what you say, there's issues everywhere. Whether it's race issues or whether it's cultural issues, they exist everywhere in the world. And like you, Larry, I've traveled to many, many places, many, many times around the world. And I see it. I still see it in certain parts. Some countries are better than others, but you encounter it at some point or another. And I suppose you have to have the resilience to get through it. So,
you're talking about the different, we see the skin color. That's something you can visually see. You can hear sometimes the different accents when you talk with someone, but you don't know somebody's religion many times, unless it's a religion where you can tell because of their wearing particular clothing. But being in Morocco here a week and a half ago, we toured one of the second largest mosque in Africa, and it was unbelievable. I've been to a lot of, religious sites in my life, but I've never been to a building like that. And the guide that we had was Muslim, and he said that the country is like 96.5%, Muslim. And
yes,
so it was interesting being in the minority and being amongst a different people. I didn't feel threatened or anything. I just thought it was very interesting. And my minor in college was history, so I love history and seeing these That was a fairly new building. Actually, it was built, I believe it started in the 80s and finished in the 90s. But in some of the places we went to in Morocco and in Spain, there were buildings that were over 1,000 years old. And
Yeah,
I've just never seen anything like that because America's a fairly new country. I mean,
yes, it is.
1600s, right? So you're talking maybe 400 or 500 years old at the
Yeah,
most. And that,
yeah,
so it was very interesting. And to be amongst a group of people who had very different beliefs than I grew up with, and yet we got along fine. So,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, look, fundamentally, I think at the grassroots level, this is one of the conclusions I've come to in life, obviously having lived in a few different countries and so on, is that at the grassroots level, people make it work. Where the division sometimes happens is in the political spaces. The leaders of countries and things, they end up promoting certain ideologies and it ends up dividing people. But everyday ordinary people like us who travel to other countries, who just talk to people, we make it work. I'm fascinated by other cultures, and it's one of the reasons I love traveling. I love to try their food, like how do you cook this type of thing? But I very rarely, I mean, when I travel, I do one or two tourist attractions, but then I tend to go off the beaten track. I will go and meander down alleyways in London that no one has gone to, and start talking to the people who own the restaurants there or the pubs there or the little tiny bookshop in the corner. That's the kind of thing that interests me.
hmm
And I've found that at the heart of everything, and I learned this even here in Australia, but more so on my travel, people really want the same thing. They want their children to be safe and healthy. They want to be able to pay their bills and have a comfortable life. Fundamentally, most people want that. And however people practice their religions and their faiths and other things, no one really cares all that much, you
yeah.
know?
Oh yeah. The
And
only
so
time they care is if they affect you.
that's right.
If
If they
they
come
lash
and
out at you
affect you, but
because you believe differently, then I got a problem. But if we
yeah,
can all just kind of be respectful of others, then like you said, it's when you get into the I know in most countries, I feel it's the same as in this country, and that is whenever you have an election, you're just voting for what you believe is the lesser of the two evils.
correct.
Because when is the last time you were ever excited about somebody, So,
That's right. And fundamentally, here in Australia, the US, the UK, I don't think that the politicians take care of us anyway.
right.
We people the communities, we take care of each other.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I don't think leadership, we haven't seen, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I haven't seen great leadership on the political arena since Nelson Mandela, because that was a man who was imprisoned for beliefs, who fought for freedom for his people. He sacrificed 27 years of his life. And the message he came out of prison was forgiveness. We need to unify and we need to forgive. And that's what he spent his presidency doing. But
Yeah.
he came out at a very late age in life and obviously wasn't around for that much longer and then passed away. But he was one of the most effective leaders. He was incredibly powerful in the way he spoke, and yet he spoke in very gentle tones. And his ultimate message after coming out of prison, being released from Robben Island, was the only way forward for the country is forgiveness and unification. That was it, and that was what he practiced. That was what he led the country through. Since his passing, unfortunately, there's been a whole bunch of different things happening in South Africa, and it's still a challenging place to be. I have relatives and cousins and people that still live there. They go through things like load shedding where they don't have electricity for hours in a day, or don't have water for hours. And so, often when I listen to those stories or I talk to my relatives over there, I am just grateful that I'm in a country like Australia, where you turn on the faucet, there's water coming out. You turn on the light, turn on the switch, and the light is on. So, things that you can so easily take for granted. But when you talk to people who live in these other countries where there's lots of troubles and challenges, we are lucky. America's lucky too as a country. I've been there many times, so I know we don't live in places where people are struggling to turn on lights and have water coming through.
Yeah. And that's back to your talking about travel. When you do travel and you visit countries where they don't have water, where they don't always have electricity. When you see those things, it makes you more appreciative of what you do have. And I think sometimes people take it for granted if they haven't seen others that don't. And we have seen
Yeah.
that. And it makes you very, very appreciative of coming back home to, just to the life that we have. We're fortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. My partner always says that when he used to travel a lot and he did for business a lot, he said every time he landed in Australia, he would want to kiss the ground. He
Yeah.
was so happy to be back
Yeah.
in the country because we just knew how much we had it.
Session I go round. A girl be cooking on a barbecue, beef stew and manapua too. Chili pepper show you on my rice. In my opal mix 'em up real nice. We could party at the bay tonight. Sweet one, make it all so right. Mahalo, but I gotta go home now. Make sure that nobody come again. Island of love, show you how to have fun on the island of love. Island of love, leave your worries and come to the island of love in the sun.
Well, alright, Mr. Jamin, sun is shining, the weather is sweet. Can't wait to escape from the jungle concrete. The heat is hotter, basket in the water. That to stop the cold runnings in our island summer. The girl is Priscilla, still a good body girl. She still a top of the rhythm and she sip on it well. Jamin, I got the vibe and flow like a swell. The island of love, a boom, them on the spell. A lot of mercy. A lot of mercy on the soul.
Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything's gonna be alright. Island of love, show you how to have fun on the island of love in the sun. Yeah, island of love, leave your worries and come to the island of love in the sun.
Island of love, so when me thinking
Ooh, island of love, show you how to have fun on the island of love in the sun.
island of love, that's so when me thinking of.
Island of love, leave your worries and come.
So you arrived in Australia then as a university age student. So probably, 19 or 20 years old. And from that time forward, then you finished university, I take it. What did you end up doing? What did you get your degree in?
So I ended up getting my degree in English literature and psychology. So for me, literature and English was always a thing. I mentioned earlier that the writing, I was always fascinated by storytelling, writing. And so I think that was a given pathway for me. When I came out of university, I didn't actually get a role in anything I'd studied in immediately. I actually went to work in a bank as a teller. I wanted a gap, I said to my parents, I'm going to go earn some money and I'm going to figure out what I want to do with this degree. And encountered a massive challenge there in that that was my very first job. And I was held up at gunpoint in that first job. Like I said, I've been through all kinds of things. And the story, when I look back, growing up in South Africa, it was probably the first lesson in resilience and being able to navigate very difficult times to still continue to grow as a person. And then along the way, the next big trauma, drama, or whatever it is you want to call it, was being held up at gunpoint. There was a series of robberies with the banks around that area that I was working in, and our bank was held up. I happened to be the teller that they put the gun to my head, double-barrel shotgun. So there was months of counseling that had to happen after that, because there was nightmares, and it took a while to get through that. And then not long after that, I met my daughter's father. And that relationship lasted until I was age 30. So it was probably about 9 years. I was 21 or going on 22 when I met him. It was a good relationship for the first few years, 4 or 5. After that, there started to be challenges. At that stage, we had bought a home together, and then I felt pregnant at age 30, and that was when everything came to a head. The relationship ended because there was domestic violence in the relationship, and also, there'd probably been 3 years of up and down. We broke up, we get back together, we broke, and I was starting to see that, that wasn't what I wanted for my life. It was also a painful time for me, because there was a time in that relationship where I didn't speak to my father, and I have always been very close to my dad. We have a very close relationship, but my father knew. My dad was like, this guy is not the guy for you, But you know how it is.
Oh, yeah.
You're stubborn, you're young, you're in love, you want to do it your way. I wouldn't listen to that. And I remember my dad just getting really angry and saying, you know what, if you're going to continue with this relationship, I know it's not good for you. I can't be around it. So when I would go and visit my parents, my father would walk out. He wouldn't even talk to me. It was a painful time because I've always been so close to him. But it was interesting when that relationship ended, and I was 4 months pregnant when it ended, and it ended quite violently. I almost lost the baby. My father was the first one to come and get me, and he said, you're going to move in with us, you're moving back home with us, we're going to help you with the baby and help get you through this pregnancy. And my dad never once said, I told you so. He could have, because I certainly deserved it. I was that stubborn. You can probably see a pattern, bit of a hothead here, from my activist days. And also being quite stubborn in terms of how I was moving forward in life. But my dad never, ever said, I told you so. He just nurtured me, through that very, very difficult time, both him and my mother. My daughter is their first grandchild, and they were besotted with her from day one. And I remember being a little bit scared about what was it going to be like when she came, because my mother in particular was really upset at what I'd gone through. And I remember thinking, my God, she's not going to be able to love this child because it's his child. They were so angry at my ex-partner. I thought that, are they going to be able to love this kid because this kid is half his kid or whatever? But that wasn't the case. The moment she was born, she was the angel and the apple of their eye. And they certainly were the village. My parents and my siblings were the village that helped me raise my daughter.
It sounds like there wasn't a religious shunning or anything like that for, quote, having a child out of wedlock. I mean, I grew up in a super high demand religion, and something like that, people would send their daughters away if they got pregnant and things like that. So it sounds like that wasn't the case for you, which was a good thing, because, you needed your parents, and it sounds like they were there for you for sure.
I was raised as Catholic, so there was a strong element of religion and spirituality. But I think at that time, my parents were just so concerned about me making it through the pregnancy safely and the baby being born safely and things like that, that all of that stuff went out of the window, and all they did was just take care of me and take care of my daughter.
Right.
And then, I put myself in counseling. That was one of the things that, and it's probably a part of my story that I do want to share, is that the times were difficult, I had worked 3 jobs to get the house that I bought. And with the stroke of a pen, and his infidelity and then his violence towards me, The house went on the market, sold it at a loss. He walked away from everything, including financial responsibility for our daughter, and I started with nothing. I lost the entire house. There was a $50,000 debt because the house sold at a loss. That's how I started my life with my daughter. And I suppose the message is that I remember thinking, how did I attract this situation in my life? There was moments of blaming, there were moments of crying my eyes out. But then somewhere in there, I started to ask the question, like, what could I have done differently in my life that maybe wouldn't have led to this situation? And I immediately booked myself in to see a counselor or a psychologist, whatever you want to call it. We called them counselors back in those days, and started to work through the parts of me that needed to be worked through that had attracted that situation. Because one of the things I knew, without even knowing how I knew, was that I did not want to have my daughter be a victim in life. I wanted to be an example for her of how not to be a victim of life. And so I was like, I need to go figure this out. I've got to figure this out. I've got to create life differently, because I don't want her to grow up in a single parent home thinking she's a victim. And so I went and sorted myself out. It was hard. It was difficult. Lots of tears. And I think the psychologist at the time, the counselor, she gave me like 2 sessions where she let me unburden, she let me cry, she let me blame, she let me do all the things I needed to do. And by the 3rd or 4th session, she asked me what I consider to be one of the most important questions in my life that someone's ever asked me. And she said to me, so what role did you play in all of this? And I remember my instinct was, gosh, I want to punch this woman, because I wanted her to feel sorry for me.
Right.
I didn't want to answer that question. But she left that question at the end of session 3 or 4. I think it was maybe session 4. And she said, now I want you to go away and I want you to think about this. And she said, since you love writing so much, I want you to write it out. Write whatever comes up. How did you attract? What role did you play in creating this mess in your life? And I did do it. And I'm glad I did it. It was painful to do. I was angry doing it. I didn't like facing myself in the mirror. But it was the best thing that someone's ever done for me, because from there was when I turned my life.
Yeah, because you don't want to repeat it and do it again.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so then I went on to, once I had the good fortune of someone, a previous boss ringing me. I was on maternity leave after I'd had the baby. And he rang me and said, I've got this really difficult project. And no, it wasn't my boss. It was a different boss in the same company. He rang me and said, you used to work for, I think his name was Bruce. He said, you worked for Bruce. And Bruce said, you're the person that can help me deliver this really difficult project. And he said, I know you're on maternity leave, but will you consider it? And I immediately thought, oh, here's an opportunity. So I said, yes, I'll come back early, but these are the conditions. That was when I first negotiated my career strategy. So I work in the career space, the career coaching space, but I negotiated a deal for myself. I said to him, I'll come off maternity leave early. My baby was only 4 months at the time. I said, but you need to let me work from home most of the time. This is 28 years ago when working from home wasn't a thing. I said, I'll come into the office on Mondays. I'll do all the meetings on Mondays with whoever I need to have the meetings with, and then I work from home, because I said, I'm not leaving my daughter in daycare for the rest of the week. I need to be with my child. And I said to him, and here's the deal. Let's try it for 3 months. And he agreed to that. And then what I did, and this is one of the things when I work with people that I teach them, I was like, you can negotiate and ask for something, but then you also have to give something. Because why would someone just trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do? So I decided, okay, 3 months. And in that 3 months, I made it my business to deliver above and beyond. And I did. And after that, that was the way forward for me in my career. I was able to negotiate any kind of working conditions because I built the reputation of honoring my word. If I needed to deliver a project and I needed to deliver it within a certain time frame and a certain budget, I did it. And I was fortunate in that my daughter, she slept through the night from a very young age, 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks of baby not sleeping and not settling, and then she just slept. And I said, God looked after me because I was like, I got a child that was fairly independent, that slept really well. And so she would go down at 6 in the evening, and I would be working on all these projects, till 8 or 9 at night. Life became about being a mother and work, because I was determined to build a really great reputation for companies I was working for, so that I could continue to have that kind of flexibility in my working environment. And that's a big part of the success in my story, is that I negotiated for what I wanted, but I also made sure I delivered. I made sure that the trust they put in me, I upheld that trust.
Yeah. And then the organization knew that they had somebody they could depend on. And if they had a project or something that needed to be done, they knew that they could go to you and you would get it done. And that makes you very valuable in the organization.
That's right. And I negotiated, I created career strategies. I mean, as I said, writing was always a thing for me. So I wrote and rewrote my resumes when I wanted to go for next level promotions or next level jobs, and created a strategy that worked for me. And I guess from hitting the rock bottom where I lost everything to where I landed a role that paid me double my income was about 8 or 9 months. And the people around me, this is family, friends, colleagues who knew my story, because I'm quite transparent. I don't hide anything. I'm not a very good liar. And so I was fairly transparent, and people knew I'd gone through a very difficult time, that I was a single mom and had become a single mom when I was still pregnant. They saw how I'd grown so rapidly, and they came and asked for help. Can you help me in that? And that's actually where my business in career coaching was born. But I had landed these great roles in corporate, so it was very much a side hustle, very much a part-time, maybe 5 to 6 hours a week I would do on this, helping people with coaching and positioning them to get better jobs. And I did my corporate role full-time. So there was life back then was about the small side hustle, the corporate role, and being a present mother. That was pretty much the only thing. There was a lot of sacrifice here again, like my father had made sacrifice for me to get out of that debt, to pay off that 50 grand debt. And I did that within 2 years. There were no more movies anymore. There were no more dinners out. There was none of that. If people wanted to do all those things that I used to do socially with them, I would say to them, come to my house and I'll cook you dinner. So my friends started to hang out at my house. They'd be on my couch. We'd talk, till early hours of the morning and things, and we would share. They would bring a bottle of wine. I would cook or something. And that's how life was, because I couldn't afford to go out. I couldn't afford to do all the things that I used to do, because I had this massive debt hanging over my shoulders, and I had the newborn, and I was trying to grow in my career. So it really was a combination of prioritizing what mattered to me or what I needed to do. And I can't remember the name of the movie, but I think of it often when I look at the life journey. It was about doing what I had to do so I could get to do what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I know it's a Denzel Washington movie. He started it, and it's this young, something around poets or something. And he says to these young school kids, sometimes you have to do what you have to do in order to do what you want to do.
Right.
And those first few years of my daughter's life was very much about that, sacrificing a lot to be able to move forward. But it did happen, and I did build a very successful corporate career. We did a lot of traveling. My daughter and I traveled the world. I lived in the States with her when she was from age 4. She was age 4 to 6. We lived in the US in California. And then later on, when she was a teenager, I went with her to New York because she wanted to try her hand out in her career in New York. And so I was in New York for about 8-9 months. So I've lived, in different parts of the world, and I've traveled extensively. But that was not the start of life for me. As you can hear from the story, there were a lot of challenges to overcome along the way.
I was in the corporate world for many years, and I would tell my employees, sometimes they would come to me and they say, well, what do I need to do to get ahead? I had a really good month this month. Could I be considered for something more? And I say, well, here's the thing. Consistency creates credibility. You need to be consistent in your efforts. You can't one week do really well and then another week just coast. You need to put forth that effort. And that was one of the things, and I heard you talking about it. And then the other thing too is we all have things in life that we call have-tos. And, you kind of have to do these things, but obviously it's more fun and you're going to be more excited if they're want-tos. And so
Yes.
I would try to get them to take a have-to and create it and turn it into a want-to. It's not always easy, but that would be something we would try to work towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, the 1-2s was always travel the world. Even growing up in South Africa, I knew I wanted to get out of South Africa to see the world. I knew South Africa was not just it, and especially that narrow perspective. But travel came later for me. So I think my daughter was 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old when I took my first trip. And that girl's passport has got so many stamps because she's traveled everywhere with me. Yeah, and this was a part of what I wanted. Because for me, deciding to have my baby in such difficult circumstances, I said to myself, if I'm going to have this baby, I am going to be its mother. It's not going to be raised by a nanny or anything like that. I want to be the mother. I want to be present. So that was a priority for me. And so everything that I negotiated around my work was around being able to be a fully present mother to my daughter and then do success in my career as well. And so, and the thing is, she's 27 years old now. Her work ethic is very similar to mine. So I didn't purposefully teach her that, but I think she watched me growing up. She saw that mum was always on it, always delivering. And I always said to her, don't ever do anything half-baked. Whatever you do, cook that cake properly. Bake that cake properly. So if you're going to, whatever you do, put your energy and your attention to it. Be proud of the work that you do and make sure that others know they can trust you. And she has incredible work ethic, and she's also very successful in her. And I know it's because she was watching me.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you're proud of your daughter. I have a daughter the same age, and we're very proud of her. You were talking about the want-tos and the have-tos and that you wanted to travel, but before you did that, you had to get out from under that $50,000 debt and having that newborn. So that was a period of time where you're doing the have-tos. But
yes,
that's what I would always try to tell people. If you do and put the effort into the have-tos, you will have the want-tos. And so, that's a great, the things you're saying are so, I hear you saying them and it just brings back memories to me because, we've all had to do the have-tos, every one of us. It's nobody just gets through life with all want-tos and doing all the want-tos.
I think it also builds a level of resilience and character, because one of the things I've learned is that I'm not afraid because life can turn on a dime. You can be heading in this direction, you think everything's sailing so smoothly, and then something happens. There can be illness, there can be loss of, for example, we just in our house at the start of January, there was a leak in the house. By the time we had that leak repaired, there was almost $10,000 at the door. Right? Just like that. So you haven't budgeted for this. But what I've learned is that things like this happen in life. It doesn't sail smoothly all the time. Someone can get sick. You can have a leak in the house. And, our dog got very sick last year and she was in vet ICU for 5 days, another huge bill. But what I learned was that when you do what you have to, there's something that you build within yourself. And so when the challenges come, there's a level of trust that you have in yourself that you can get through it. Even if it's difficult, even if life is turning on a dime and you're going, oh my God, it was going so well and now this has happened. There's a level of trust you build in yourself when you consistently show yourself that you can show up for yourself.
Yeah. And think about your dad. Think of the pride that your dad has when he looks at you and what you've done and how you were able to rise above your condition when you had your child, like not just raised as a single mother, but you had the baby as a single person too. You didn't have the support of a spouse and
No,
never got the financial support. And so, and now,
no,
you've gone on to have a successful career and raise a wonderful daughter. And I'm sure now he looks back and that's because that's what we want, right? You said it earlier. We want our
yes,
children to be happy. We want them to
yeah,
have opportunities. And I think that's what every parent wants.
absolutely, yeah. And Dad he's very proud. He's very pleased that all his 5 children settled into Australia, that we're all doing well. And he had my daughter for many years as his only grandchild, but my younger sister has had a son, and her son's he's 11 years old, 12 years old now. And so my parents have 2 beautiful grandchildren whom they love. I know because I often go for walks with my dad on the beach, he just looks back at that time, and for him, he doesn't even see it as any kind of sacrifice. He just is so glad that he brought us here and that he can bear witness to his children living really good lives and having a peaceful life, not living in a country with conflict and war-torn zones and all of those things, and that his grandkids are going to have that too. So Dad, we did eventually make up. We only didn't speak for that short time, probably a year or a year and a half, when I was with my daughter's father. But once that whole thing fell apart, as I said, my father nurtured me back to good health in both my mind, body, and spirit. And he's always been there for us, all of his kids. Really solid man, my dad. And he's a great grandfather. He's an absolute magic grandfather to his grandchildren.
Right. And I'm in that place in my life now where I have 3 grandchildren, and you love your kids, but there's something about grandkids too. I mean, they're pretty awesome.
Yeah, trust me, the grandchildren, they know who to go to. They go to grandma when
Yes, they do. And I did too when I was a little guy. Well, hey, listen,
So,
I sure enjoyed hearing your story. Is there anything that you would like to, as we wrap up here the next couple minutes, do you have anything that you would like to say to the listeners? Or maybe is there a way for them to reach out to you if they would like to contact you?
So I'm in the career coaching space, and I mostly work with midlife professionals, both men and women, who are looking to change careers. So often when women and men get to that midlife years, they're wanting to do different things. They've been in a role for 20 years or sometimes 25 years. And many of them start to look towards their passion projects, and they want their career to be combined with a passion project. So that's the kind of space that I work in. And if people want to know how I do it, or even free tips and tricks, I'm on LinkedIn. Wendy A. Alexander is the handle for LinkedIn. So I couldn't get Wendy Alexander. I had to put my middle initial in there. So it's Wendy A. Alexander is my handle. And then my website is happycareerhub.com. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk to anyone, and I work with people from all around the world.
And I'll put that information in the show notes too, so people can reach out. But I'll tell you, Wendy, I knew a little bit about, some of that stuff because just as I read up a little bit before we did this, but it's been fun for me. I told you before we ever started that I do this podcast because I'm a people person. I just like meeting people and hearing their stories, man, and the things that people go through. Nobody gets through life without some struggles and some hard times. Right. I think that's what makes us into the individuals we are as we grow and as we get older. It's those life experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fundamental message I would like to leave people with is that no challenge is so big that you can't overcome them. All you need to do is find the strength within yourself, but also find the support in your communities, because fundamentally human beings, and I've seen some crazy atrocities growing up in South Africa, but I still believe that human beings are good inside. And fundamentally, we want to move forward as a community, as society. And I've not seen too many human beings not want to help others out, right? So
yes.
You're not alone. No one's ever really alone. Simply reach out and people will step up for you. I've had people step up for me many times in my life.
Yeah, as have I. Now we are in that position where we can help others too. So,
correct.
And that comes from that travel again. When you get out and you see other people, you see most people are good people. You watch the news and it might give you a feeling that's not the case. the news
Ignore
isn't
the
right. I
news,
tell
what
people,
I'm
don't even
saying.
watch the news. Try not to spend time watching the news because you get a really skewed view of the world.
That's right. Look, my viewpoint is that someone's always going to tell you what's going on. You don't need to watch the news because someone in your circle is going to say, "Hey, did you see that this happened?" So you're never going to be in the dark.
Yep.
And I don't think it's really great for our mental well-being to watch the doom and gloom morning, noon, and night. I think we have to find uplifting things to watch because you're not going to get left behind when it comes to the news. There's someone in your life who's going to let you know what's going on.
Yep. Yep. And if you can't travel, get out and volunteer, and you'll meet people that way too. And there's just a great feeling of satisfaction and stuff that comes from helping others. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
All right, Wendy. Well, thank you very much. I sure appreciate you taking time and telling your story today.
Oh, pleasure. It was wonderful to be with you, Larry.
All right, everyone. Well, hey, check back in 2 weeks. We'll have another interesting guest, another amazing story here on Nobody Knows Your Story.
Not far away, let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Let's talk story.
Let's talk story.
Let's talk story.
Well, a little of this and a little of that. Funny how time just slips away.
Cuz, we gonna talk story.
Eh? Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Talking story. Time for friends to share. Time to hear what's